My name is Claire, and for the past 2 years I've been watching my husband, Daniel, slowly fade away. When we first got the diagnosis of stomach cancer, I remember feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Daniel was only 48, a senior executive at a tech company, and we had a beautiful 9-year-old son, Noah. We were supposed to have decades ahead of us. The sun filtered through our bedroom window, casting long shadows across Daniel's gaunt face as I held his hand. The hospice nurse had warned me it wouldn't be long now. I studied his features, trying to memorize every line, every curve. How is it possible to both hope for someone's suffering to end and desperately wish for more time in the same breath? "Claire," he whispered, his voice barely audible, the effort clearly draining what little strength he had left. His eyes, though sunken, still held that warmth that had drawn me to him 12 years ago. "Take care of Noah. You're the strongest person I know." Those were his last words. I sat there for hours after, still holding his hand as it grew cold, unable to process that my partner was gone. My body felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped away everything inside me, leaving just an empty shell. The room grew darker as evening approached, but I couldn't bring myself to turn on a light. The one small blessing in this nightmare was that Daniel's financial success meant we could afford the best treatment available. We had flown to specialists across the country, tried experimental therapies, and spared no expense. But as the months dragged on, it became clear that all this treatment was just buying time, not offering a cure. Through it all, Susan and Jack, Daniel's parents, were our rocks. They lived just 20 minutes away and stepped in without hesitation when things got tough. "Claire, we'll pick Noah up from school today," Susan would say on days when Daniel was scheduled for treatment, her gentle voice steady and reliable. "Don't worry about dinner either. I've made extra lasagna, Daniel's favorite. Maybe it'll tempt his appetite." Noah would often tug on my sleeve when I tucked him in at night, his eyes wide with hope and fear, so much like his father's that it made my heart ache. "Mom, when is Dad going to get better?" I never knew what to say. How do you tell a child that his father is dying? So, I just stroked his dark hair, so much like Daniel's before the chemo took it, and said, "The doctors are trying their best, sweetie." My own parents, on the other hand, were a different story. My mother, Patricia, and my father, Richard, lived just as close as Daniel's parents, but they might as well have been on another planet. Their sprawling colonial in the suburbs, with its manicured lawn and pristine white fence, seemed to symbolize the distance between us, perfectly maintained on the outside, cold and unwelcoming within. "Mom, can you pick up Noah from school today? Daniel has had a bad reaction to the chemo, and Susan has a doctor's appointment." My fingers clutched the phone tightly as I waited for her response, already anticipating the excuse. "Oh, Claire, I'm so sorry, but we promised to help your sister with her apartment hunting today. You know how Vanessa gets when she's stressed." Patricia's voice held that familiar tone, polite regret that never quite reached sincerity. It was always Vanessa. It had been that way my entire life. When I was 7, my parents missed my school play because Vanessa had a cold. When I graduated high school, they left right after the ceremony to get to Jessica's dance recital, even though she was just in the ensemble. I'd gotten used to it over the years. Daniel became my family, and his parents treated me more like a daughter than my own ever did. So, when Daniel's condition took a turn for the worse last month, I braced myself for the end, surrounded by the family that had chosen me. The night Daniel died, I was holding his hand. His breathing had become shallow hours before, and the hospice nurse had warned me it wouldn't be long. Susan and Jack arrived at the house within an hour of my call, their faces etched with the same grief that was consuming me. Susan's eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice remained steady as she wrapped her arms around me. "We're here, sweetheart," she said softly, her perfume, something floral and comforting, enveloping me like a familiar blanket. "We'll always be here." Jack stood quietly beside her, his tall frame somehow smaller in that moment, one hand on Noah's shoulder. The four of us huddled together in the dimly lit living room, bound by loss and love. That night, I sent a text to my mother, "Daniel passed away tonight." I couldn't bring myself to call. The thought of hearing her voice, of having to respond to whatever bland sympathy she might offer, was more than I could bear. Her response came an hour later. It's terrible. No call, no offer to come over, no question about how Noah and I were doing, just 2 words. But I was too numb to care. There was a funeral to plan, a son to console, and a life to somehow piece back together. Days after Daniel's death, the days after Daniel's death passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and trying to explain to Noah that his father wasn't coming home. Susan and Jack were there every step of the way, handling calls to the funeral home when I couldn't form words and sitting with Noah when he had questions I couldn't answer. But where did Dad actually go? Noah asked one evening, his small hands fidgeting with the model airplane Daniel had helped him build. Susan sat beside him on his bed, her gray hair catching the light from his dinosaur lamp. Your dad will always be in your heart, she explained with gentle wisdom. And in the stars. Maybe that special one right there. She pointed out his window to the brightest star in the evening sky. The day before the funeral, I was drowning in details. The funeral home needed final decisions on the program, distant relatives were calling for directions, and I still needed to pick up Noah's suit. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Daniel died. My eyes burned from exhaustion, and my body felt like it was moving through molasses. I need to ask my parents to watch Noah, I told Susan as we sat at my kitchen table surrounded by sympathy cards. The morning light seemed harsh, illuminating the dark circles under my eyes and the coffee stains on the papers before us. You and Jack are already doing so much. I drove Noah to my parents' house, rehearsing what I would say when we arrived. Their house looked perfect as always, fresh flowers visible through the front window, the brass door knocker gleaming in the sunlight. But the warmth stopped at the threshold. My mother opened the door wearing a light jacket, purse already in hand. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and her makeup was flawless, ready for someone else's crisis, not mine. Claire, this isn't a good time, she said, not even inviting us in. Her eyes barely registered Noah standing beside me, his small hand clutching mine. Mom, please, it's just for a few hours. I have to finalize everything for the funeral. My voice cracked slightly, betraying the exhaustion and desperation I was trying to hide from my son. We've had these plans for weeks, my father cut in, appearing behind my mother. He looked annoyed, as if we were solicitors interrupting his day. We can't cancel now. Before I could argue further, they both stepped outside, locking the door behind them. The sound of the lock turning felt like a perfect metaphor for our relationship. They had always shut me out when I needed them most. We really have to go, my mother said firmly, her voice dropping as she added, I'm sure you can find someone else. They hurried to their car without so much as a goodbye to Noah, who stood there confused and hurt. Once they drove away, I knelt down to Noah's level, trying to mask my anger with a reassuring smile. Looks like Grandma and Grandpa had somewhere important to be. How about we call Amy instead? She has that cat you like. Noah nodded silently, his eyes reflecting a hurt too deep for a 9-year-old to understand. I called my friend Amy, who immediately agreed to watch him. Of course I'll take him, Claire. Brady's been asking when Noah could come over anyway. Don't even think twice about it. After dropping Noah at Amy's house, curiosity got the better of me. I took a detour past my parents' house on my way home. The lights were on, and Vanessa's red Mazda was parked in the driveway. So that's the important plan, I muttered to myself, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. They weren't busy at all, they just preferred helping Vanessa to supporting me, even now. The familiar ache of rejection bloomed in my chest, but this time it was tinged with something else, a dawning realization that perhaps it was time to stop expecting water from an empty well. That evening, I sent a message to our family WhatsApp group. Daniel's funeral is at 11 a.m. on Thursday at Greenwood Chapel. Service will be followed by a small reception. I watched as the read receipts appeared next to my parents' and Vanessa's names. No one replied. The night before the funeral, anxiety drove me to call my mother directly. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice distracted. Mom, you saw my message about the funeral tomorrow, right? It starts at 11. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional almost, as if I were coordinating with a distant acquaintance rather than my own mother. There was a pause on the line. I could hear voices in the background, laughter. Oh, Claire, I'm sorry, but we won't be able to make it. Vanessa has booked several tables at Emilio's to celebrate her promotion. It's at noon, and we've already committed. I nearly dropped the phone. The casual dismissal of Daniel's funeral, my husband, Noah's father, felt like a slap across my face. Mom, this is Daniel's funeral we're talking about. Daniel, who paid for the repairs on your house 3 years ago when the roof collapsed. Daniel, who has been part of our family for over a decade. My voice had risen, and I was pacing the kitchen floor, the tile cold beneath my bare feet. That was a long time ago, Claire, my mother replied coldly. We need to focus on the living, not the dead. Vanessa needs our support right now. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood in the kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. The silence of the house pressed in around me, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Daniel had insisted on hanging. Every home needs at least one analog clock, Claire. Some things shouldn't be digital. I immediately dialed Vanessa's number, my hand shaking with anger and disbelief. Maybe she didn't realize. Maybe she could reschedule. Maybe there was still a chance at decency. Hey, she answered, sounding annoyed that I'd interrupted her evening. I could hear music and voices in the background. Vanessa, Mom says you're having a party tomorrow at the same time as Daniel's funeral. Can't you reschedule or at least push it back so they can attend the service first? I tried to keep my voice reasonable, though every word cost me effort. No way, she scoffed, the sound like glass breaking in my ear. I can't change the reservation now. Everyone's already confirmed, and this promotion is a big deal. She paused, then added with biting dismissal, it's not like I can reschedule a funeral party or whatever. A funeral party? I repeated, my voice rising. The casual cruelty stole my breath. My husband is dead, Vanessa. The man who paid for your entire college education. That was ages ago, she dismissed. Look, my promotion is more important than some funeral. People die every day. Then she hung up too. I stood there in my kitchen, phone still in hand, utterly stunned. The granite countertop was cool under my free hand as I leaned heavily against it, trying to process the conversation. As if to twist the knife further, my phone pinged with a message from my mother, stop pressuring your sister. Her celebration is more important than a funeral. She's worked hard for this promotion. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode, and walked to the living room window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, lights glowing warmly from other houses where families were together, where people cared about each other. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes, allowing myself, just for a moment, to feel the full weight of not just Daniel's loss, but the absence of the parents I had always wished for. Funeral day, the day of Daniel's funeral, dawned bright and clear, a mockery of the darkness I felt inside. The sky was that perfect shade of blue that Daniel had always loved, the kind he'd point to when we went hiking, saying, "That's why they call it heaven, Claire." Now that blue felt like a personal affront. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day. The fabric felt foreign in my hands, heavy with significance. From down the hall, I could hear Susan helping Noah with his tie, a skill Daniel had been planning to teach him when he's a bit older. Now that moment would never come. "You look very handsome," I heard Susan say, her voice gentle but steady. "Your dad would be so proud of you." The modest chapel was filled with people who had genuinely cared for Daniel, colleagues from his company, friends from college, neighbors, and family, his family, anyway. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews and the simple mahogany casket at the front. Noah sat between Susan and Jack, their hands holding his as tears streamed down his face. Jack's shoulders were rigid with the effort of maintaining composure for Noah's sake, but I could see the grief etched into every line of his face. Susan's eyes never left Noah, her attention completely focused on comforting her grandson even through her own pain. During the eulogy, I stood at the podium, my hands gripping the edges to stop them from shaking. The faces before me blurred as I spoke about Daniel's generosity, his kindness, and his unwavering devotion to our son. Daniel lived with purpose, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. He believed that success meant nothing if it wasn't shared. He poured his heart into being a husband, a father, a son, and a friend. He measured his life not in achievements or possessions, but in moments of connection. I glanced at Noah, his small face solemn and tear-stained. He was especially proud of being Noah's father. He said that watching Noah grow was like seeing the world become new again every day. After the service, the chapel emptied into the reception area where photos of Daniel throughout his life were displayed. Several people approached me, offering condolences and asking about my parents' absence. "I was surprised not to see your folks," Daniel's college roommate said, a tall man with kind eyes who had traveled from Seattle for the funeral. "Are they ill?" "They had a prior commitment," I replied stiffly, not wanting to elaborate. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. Susan noticed my discomfort from across the room and smoothly appeared at my side. "Claire, I think Noah needs you for a moment," she said, gracefully steering me away from the conversation. In the quiet hallway, she squeezed my hand. "You're doing wonderfully, dear. Almost through." That night, after everyone had gone home and Noah had finally fallen asleep, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by sympathy cards and flower arrangements. The house felt impossibly empty without Daniel, the silence so loud it hurt. His favorite chair sat vacant, the book he'd been reading still on the side table with a bookmark eternally stuck on page 158. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Hope the funeral went okay. Mom posted pics from my party. Got promoted to senior account executive. Party popper confetti ball, no condolences, no acknowledgement of what I'd just been through, just a celebration of her accomplishment, complete with party emojis." I turned off my phone without responding and went upstairs to check on Noah. He was sleeping soundly, clutching the teddy bear Daniel had given him on his last birthday. I crawled into bed beside him, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of his breathing, and for the first time since Daniel died, I let myself cry without restraint, for Daniel, for Noah, for the family I had lost, and for the one I still had. The week after, for the next week, I moved through life in a fog. I'd go through the motions of making breakfast for Noah, smiling at appropriate times, answering condolence calls with rehearsed gratitude, but inside I felt hollow. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in a room with no memory of why I'd entered it, or staring into the refrigerator without seeing its contents. Susan and Jack came by daily, bringing food, taking Noah to the park, helping me sort through Daniel's belongings. "Do you want me to help with these?" Susan asked one afternoon, gently touching a stack of Daniel's sweaters I'd been avoiding. She didn't pressure me when I shook my head, just nodded in understanding. "Whenever you're ready, dear." My parents didn't call once, not to check on their grandson, not to see how I was holding up, nothing. The absence spoke volumes, louder than any words could have. A week after the funeral, I received a call from Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Wilson. His voice was professionally gentle, the kind perfected by those who regularly deal with grieving clients. "Mrs. Turner, it's time to discuss Daniel's will," he explained. He was quite thorough in his preparations. Would tomorrow afternoon work for the reading? I agreed and then called Susan and Jack to invite them. They'd been named in the will, of course, and Daniel would have wanted them there. The next day, Mr. Wilson arrived at our house at precisely 2 p.m., carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a somber expression that softened when he saw Noah. He knelt down to the boy's level, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Your father spoke of you often," he told my son with genuine warmth. "He was very proud of you." Noah's small hand disappeared into Mr. Wilson's larger one, his solemn nod acknowledging the connection to his father. We all settled in the living room, me, Noah, Susan, and Jack, ready for what I expected to be a straightforward reading. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floor, and the house was quiet except for the occasional creaking of the old leather armchair where Jack sat. Daniel and I had discussed his wishes extensively during his illness, so there would be no surprises. But just as Mr. Wilson was about to begin, the doorbell rang, its chime jarring in the quiet room. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Susan asked, looking confused, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "No," I replied, equally puzzled as I went to answer the door. The sight that greeted me was so unexpected that I nearly slammed the door shut immediately. My parents and Vanessa stood on the porch, all wearing expressions of exaggerated sympathy that didn't reach their eyes. My mother had dressed for the occasion in an understated navy dress that still managed to look expensive, while my father fidgeted with his tie. Vanessa stood slightly behind them, examining her manicure with poorly disguised boredom. "What are you doing here?" I asked bluntly, making no move to step aside and let them in. The memory of their absence at the funeral was still raw, a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. "We heard about the reading," my mother said, trying to look past me into the house. Her voice dropped to a stage whisper. "Daniel wasn't a stranger to us, you know. We have a right to be here." "A right?" I repeated incredulously, my hand tightening on the doorknob. "You couldn't be bothered to come to his funeral, but you have a right to be at his will reading?" The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. My father cleared his throat, the sound like sandpaper. "Now, Claire, there's no need to bring up old grievances. We're here to support you." His tone was the one he'd always used when he thought I was being difficult, condescending and impatient. "Support me?" I laughed bitterly. "That's rich." But before I could shut the door, my mother gently pushed past me, with my father and Vanessa following close behind. "We're family," she said firmly, as if that explained everything, as if the word family was a password that granted automatic access. I stood there stunned by their audacity as they made their way to the living room, my mother's heels clicking on the hardwood floor like an advancing army. When I returned to the living room, the atmosphere had changed completely. Susan and Jack's faces had darkened when they saw who had arrived, their welcoming warmth replaced by protective wariness. "What are they doing here?" Jack whispered when I sat down beside him, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "I have no idea," I replied, my hand shaking with anger as I smoothed my skirt. "But I'm not going to make a scene in front of Noah." His small presence beside me was a reminder of what really mattered today. Mr. Wilson, ever the professional, merely raised an eyebrow before continuing. "Shall we proceed with the reading of the will?" he asked, his tone neutral as he opened his briefcase and removed a folder. My parents and Vanessa sat on the couch opposite Susan and Jack, with Noah beside me in an armchair. The tension in the room was suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. The will reading, I, Daniel Andrew Turner, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament, Mr. Wilson began, reading from the formal document. His voice was measured and clear, creating a strange formality in our living room where just weeks ago Daniel and I had been curled up watching movies with Noah. Daniel had left everything meticulously organized, detailed plans for every aspect of our lives without him. The thought made my throat tighten. Even in his final months, he'd been taking care of us, planning for a future he wouldn't see. To his parents, he left $200,000, enough to ensure their comfortable retirement and to thank them for their unwavering support throughout our marriage and his illness. "We never expected," Susan began, her voice breaking as Jack held her hand tightly. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but there was something else there too, a fierce pride in her son's thoughtfulness. Then came the main provisions. To me, he left our house, 2 apartments in the city center that I hadn't even known he owned, and $400,000 in liquid assets. "The apartments generate significant rental income," Mr. Wilson explained, adjusting his glasses as he looked at me. "Daniel purchased them as investments 3 years ago. They are in excellent locations and are currently leased to long-term tenants." I sat there stunned by the extent of Daniel's planning. I knew we were financially comfortable, but I had no idea he'd made these additional investments. He'd ensured Noah and I would be financially secure, no matter what. The realization brought fresh tears to my eyes, another expression of his love, hidden until now. As Mr. Wilson continued reading, I noticed my mother's expression change from faint sympathy to undisguised interest. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Beside her, Vanessa sat up straighter, suddenly paying attention where before she'd been scrolling through her phone beneath the coffee table. When the lawyer finished, my mother clapped her hands together, the sound jarringly cheerful in the somber room. "Well, this is wonderful news, isn't it, Claire?" Her voice was bright and brittle as glass. "You're quite well off now." The room fell silent. Susan and Jack stared at her in shock, their faces mirroring the disbelief I felt. Noah looked up at me, confused by the sudden tension. "I mean," my mother continued, oblivious to the tension, or perhaps deliberately ignoring it, "with 2 apartments and all that money, you can certainly help out family now. Vanessa has been struggling with rent on her place, haven't you, dear?" Vanessa nodded eagerly, her earlier boredom completely gone. "It's so expensive these days, and you have 2 apartments just sitting there." She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I've actually been looking at places in the city center." What a coincidence, right? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband wasn't even cold in his grave, and they were already eyeing his assets. The apartment buildings he'd carefully invested in for Noah's future. "For our security. You should give one of those apartments to Vanessa," my father chimed in, as if it were the most reasonable suggestion in the world. His tone was that of someone proposing a simple solution to an obvious problem. "What do you need 2 for anyway?" I stood up slowly, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The room seemed to recede around me, narrowing to just these 3 people who had shown up uninvited, who had skipped Daniel's funeral, who now sat in my living room demanding his property. "Are you serious right now?" My voice was low, controlled, but with an edge that made Noah look up at me in surprise. "You skip Daniel's funeral for a party, ignore me and Noah for a week, then show up uninvited to his will reading to demand his property?" "Now, Claire," my father started, his tone condescending, one hand raised as if to pacify an unreasonable child. "There's no need to be selfish. You're alone now, but you have all this wealth. You should share it." "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to remain calm. The word struck a nerve, hitting too close to decades of being made to feel that my needs, my feelings, were somehow less valid than Vanessa's. "I'm not alone. I have Noah, and everything Daniel left is for his son's future. Every penny will go to making sure Noah has the best education, the best opportunities, the best life his father can no longer be here to provide." Noah's small hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. The gesture nearly broke me, his silent support, even as he couldn't fully understand what was happening. I watched as my parents and sister exchanged glances, their eyes flickering to Noah with something that looked disturbingly like resentment. As if this child, this 9-year-old boy who had just lost his father, was somehow an obstacle to their plans. "You're being ridiculous," my mother snapped, her carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal the impatience beneath. "Vanessa needs help now, not some child who won't even go to college for years." "Some child is your grandson," Jack interjected, his voice tight with anger as he rose to stand beside me. His tall frame seemed imposing now, protective rather than diminished by grief as it had been at the funeral. "And his father just died." My mother's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare tell me how to treat my own grandson," she snapped at Jack. "We've been in this family longer than you have. And yet you've shown remarkably little interest in being part of it," Susan replied coldly, still seated but with a steely look I'd never seen before. Her normally gentle voice had an edge that could cut glass. "That's enough," I said firmly, my patience finally snapping. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick with tension. Noah didn't need to witness this. "Noah, can you go upstairs to your room for a little while? Take Mr. Wilson with you to show him your model airplanes." The lawyer, clearly relieved to escape the family drama, quickly stood and took Noah's hand. "I'd love to see your collection, young man." Noah hesitated, looking up at me with concern in his eyes that no 9-year-old should have to feel for their parent. "It's okay, sweetie," I assured him, bending down to his level. "We're just having a grown-up discussion. I'll be up soon." He nodded solemnly and led Mr. Wilson upstairs, the sound of their footsteps fading as they climbed. Once they were out of earshot, I turned to my parents and sister, no longer holding back. The dam that had contained years of hurt, disappointment, and silent acceptance finally broke. "How dare you come into my house days after my husband's funeral that you couldn't be bothered to attend and demand his money?" My voice trembled with emotion, but I didn't care anymore. Daniel worked his entire life to provide for me and Noah. He battled cancer for 2 years, and in all that time, what help did you offer? None. You wouldn't even watch Noah for a few hours. "That's not fair," my father began, but I cut him off with a gesture so sharp it might as well have been physical. "No, what's not fair is that Daniel spent thousands of dollars fixing your roof when it collapsed during that storm 3 years ago." The memory of Daniel, up late working on calculations, insisting that we help my parents even though they'd barely acknowledged his birthday weeks before, fueled my anger. "What's not fair is that we paid for Vanessa's entire college education when you claimed you couldn't afford it." "Well, let me make something perfectly clear. I will not be giving any of Daniel's money or property to you, not now, not ever. Every penny will go to supporting Noah and securing his future. That's what Daniel wanted, and that's what will happen." My mother's face contorted with rage, the carefully maintained mask of social propriety completely gone. "You ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Mom? Name one thing, one single act of selfless parenting." I stood my ground, waiting, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. She opened and closed her mouth, unable to come up with an answer. In that moment, I saw her clearly, perhaps for the first time in my life, not as the mother I'd always yearned for, but as she truly was. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "I think it's time for you all to leave." They gathered their things in stony silence, my mother's movements jerky with barely contained fury, my father's face red with either anger or embarrassment. I couldn't tell which and didn't care. Vanessa shot me a venomous look as she snatched up her designer purse. "You'll regret this," she hissed as they filed toward the door. "When you need us, don't come crawling back." The door slammed behind them, and I collapsed onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. The house fell quiet again, the echo of the slamming door fading into silence. "You did the right thing," Jack said, his voice gentle but firm as he sat beside me. Susan moved to my other side, her hand finding mine. "Did I? They're still my parents, and Vanessa's still my sister." The words came automatically, the product of decades of making excuses for their behavior. "Biology doesn't make family," Susan said, sitting beside me and taking my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady around mine, her wedding ring, worn for over 40 years, catching the afternoon light. "Love makes family. Showing up makes family. Being there in the hard times makes family." I nodded, knowing she was right but still feeling the ache of rejection that had followed me my entire life. "Noah deserves better than what they offered me," I said finally, the realization crystallizing with certainty. "Yes, he does," Susan agreed, her eyes full of understanding. "And so did you, Claire. So did you." Later that night, after Susan and Jack had gone home and Noah was asleep, I sat down at my computer and saw that my mother had tagged me in a social media post. Heartbroken that my eldest daughter has become so greedy and selfish after her husband's death, refusing to help her struggling sister even though she now has 2 apartments in the city center and plenty of money. Material wealth has changed her. I stared at the screen, watching as sympathetic comments poured in from relatives and family friends who only knew whatever twisted version of the story my mother had fed them. "Don't let Claire get away with this. Family should help family. Poor Vanessa, always struggling while Claire has everything handed to her." My cousin Diane, who I hadn't spoken to in years, "So sorry to hear this, Aunt Patricia. Some people just become selfish when money's involved." My mother's bridge club friend, "It's always the quiet ones who surprise you. Who knew Claire could be so heartless?" I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd experienced before. This was a new low, Even for my mother, trying to publicly shame me into giving them Daniel's money. I took a deep breath and started typing. If my mother wanted to air our family's dirty laundry in public, then I would give the public the full, unedited version. I've been silent about this for too long, but since my mother has chosen to make our private family matters public, I feel I must respond. 3 days ago, we buried my husband, Daniel, after his 2-year battle with stomach cancer. My parents and sister did not attend his funeral. Why? Because my sister had scheduled a party to celebrate her promotion on the same day, and they felt that was more important. For those who don't know, Daniel helped my parents financially many times over the years, including paying for major repairs to their home and funding my sister's entire college education. Despite this, when I needed help during his illness, even just watching our son for a few hours, they were always too busy. Yesterday, they showed up uninvited to the reading of Daniel's will. Upon learning that he had left me and our son financially secure, they immediately demanded that I give one of our rental properties to my sister because, and I quote, she needs it more than some child. That some child is their 9-year-old grandson who just lost his father. I share this not to hurt them, but because I'm tired of being painted as the villain in a story where I've only ever tried to be a good daughter, sister, wife, and mother. Daniel's money will be used for our son's education and future, as he intended. I hope this clears things up. I attached the screenshots I'd saved, including the message where my mother had said Vanessa's party was more important than Daniel's funeral and several texts where they declined to help during his illness. My finger hovered over the post button for several seconds before I finally pressed it. The aftermath, within minutes, the comments on my mother's original post changed tone drastically. It was like watching a wave crash and then recede, leaving a completely different landscape behind. Patricia, is this true? You skipped your son-in-law's funeral for a party? This from her longtime church friend, whose profile picture showed her holding a Bible. I can't believe you'd expect Claire to give away property meant for her son. A cousin from my father's side, who I'd always thought barely knew I existed. Those text messages are shocking. How could you say a party is more important than a funeral? Someone I didn't even recognize, but whose outrage felt strangely validating. Calls and messages came in throughout the evening, relatives and friends expressing shock at my parents' behavior and offering support. Some I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out with genuine concern. My phone buzzed so persistently that I finally silenced it, setting its screen down on the coffee table. My mother tried to claim in the comments that I was lying, but the screenshots spoke for themselves. Claire has always been dramatic, she wrote, desperately trying to salvage her reputation. These messages are taken out of context. But no one was buying it. Eventually, she deleted her original post entirely, but the damage to her reputation was done. I sat in Daniel's favorite chair, watching the moonlight create patterns on the living room floor. For the first time since his death, I felt something close to peace, not because I'd won some social media battle, but because I'd finally stood up for myself, for Noah, and for the truth. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls from my parents and Vanessa. I blocked their numbers without listening to their voicemails. Whatever they had to say, I wasn't interested in hearing it. The time for talking had passed, now was the time for boundaries. Over the following weeks, they tried everything to contact me. Emails begging for forgiveness but still asking for money, messages through mutual friends, even showing up at our house unannounced. Each time, I stood firm in my decision to cut them out of our lives. Mrs. Turner, your mother is at the door again, our elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen called one afternoon. She had taken to watching out for unwanted visitors since the day my mother had tried to force her way in while Noah was home alone with the babysitter. Want me to tell her you're not available? Yes, please, I called back, grateful for the neighborhood alliance that had formed around us. And thank you, Mrs. Chen. No problem, she replied cheerfully. I'm enjoying this. Reminds me of when I told my own sister-in-law to take a hike back in '92. They're never going to change, are they? I asked Susan one afternoon as we watched Noah play in the backyard. He was building some complicated structure with sticks and rocks, his face screwed up in concentration just like Daniel's used to when he was working through a problem. Susan considered the question carefully, her eyes on Noah but her mind clearly processing my words. People rarely do, she replied honestly, not fundamentally, anyway. They might learn to behave better if given enough motivation, but at their core. She shrugged, the gesture somehow both gentle and definitive. It's strange. I always thought I needed their approval, their love. I spent my whole life trying to earn it. I plucked a blade of grass, rolling it between my fingers. Every achievement, every decision, somewhere in the back of my mind, I was always wondering if this would finally be enough for them to really see me. But now you recognize your own worth, she finished for me, her smile knowing and a little sad. And you see that Noah deserves better than to repeat that cycle. I nodded, watching my son as he triumphantly placed the final stick on whatever masterpiece he'd created. He does. Daniel did too. Susan's hand found mine, squeezing it gently. So did you, Claire. So did you. 6 months later, 6 months after Daniel's death, life had settled into a new normal. The raw, jagged edges of grief had softened somewhat, though there were still moments when loss would hit me with unexpected force, hearing a song Daniel loved on the radio, finding one of his socks tucked in the back of a drawer, seeing a father and son playing catch in the park. Susan and Jack continued to be fixtures in our lives, joining us for Sunday dinners and helping with Noah's school activities. Jack had started teaching Noah woodworking, and their latest project, a birdhouse designed to look like our home, sat proudly on the kitchen table, waiting for paint. I had started managing the rental properties Daniel had left us, finding unexpected satisfaction in the work. The apartments in the city center turned out to be excellent investments, providing a steady income that supplemented what I'd set aside for Noah's education. I also invested some of the money in shares of companies Daniel had always believed in, watching with satisfaction as the dividends rolled in. You've got quite a knack for this, my financial advisor commented during our quarterly meeting. Daniel would be proud. He taught me a lot, I replied, realizing as I said it how true it was. Daniel hadn't just provided for us, he'd shown me how to provide for myself and Noah, given me the tools and confidence to move forward. As for my parents and Vanessa, I occasionally heard updates through the family grapevine. They were struggling financially. Apparently, Vanessa had lost her job, something about personality conflicts with management, and my parents were complaining about retirement costs. Each time, the messenger would awkwardly hint that perhaps I could help them out. I heard Uncle Richard mention they might have to downsize. My cousin mentioned casually during a rare phone call. It's so hard for seniors these days. My answer was always the same. I'm sorry to hear they're having trouble, but my responsibility is to my son. Some called me cold or unforgiving. Maybe I was. But when I looked at Noah, growing stronger and happier each day, surrounded by people who truly loved him, I knew I'd made the right choice. One evening as I tucked him into bed, he asked a question that caught me off guard. Mom, do you ever miss Grandma Patricia and Grandpa Richard? His blue eyes, so like Daniel's, were serious in the glow of his night light. I paused, considering how to answer, honest without burdening him with adult problems. I miss the relationship I wish we'd had, I said finally, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. But not the one we actually had. He nodded, seeming to understand more than a child his age should have to. I'm glad we have Grandma Susan and Grandpa Jack. Me too, buddy. Me too. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, inhaling the clean scent of his shampoo. They love you very much. Dad would be happy they're here, right? His voice was already heavy with approaching sleep. Yes, I whispered, my throat tight with emotion. He would be very happy about that. After Noah drifted off, I sat on our back porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The evening was warm, with the scent of the roses Daniel had planted before he got sick drifting on the breeze. I thought about the path that had led me here, the pain and loss, but also the love and support that had carried me through. Some people would never understand why I'd cut my birth family out of my life. They'd never experienced the constant disappointment, the lifelong pattern of favoritism, the painful realization that some people are simply incapable of putting others first. But I understood, and more importantly, I'd broken the cycle. Noah would grow up knowing his worth, surrounded by people who showed their love through actions, not just words, people who showed up when it mattered, who didn't put conditions on their support, who didn't see him as a means to an end. And somewhere, I like to think, Daniel was watching, satisfied that despite everything, we were going to be okay. I'm Deborah, and I've always tried to be the responsible one in the family. At 45, I've built a solid career as an editor at a New York publishing house, live in a comfortable Manhattan apartment, and try to make sensible decisions. It wasn't always easy, especially after my divorce 5 years ago. My sister Linda, who's 2 years younger than me, is, well, let's just say we're very different people. Growing up, it wasn't easy being the older sister. My parents always seemed to find fault with everything I did, while Linda could do no wrong. When I got straight A's in high school, they'd say, "That's expected of you, Deborah," but when Linda got B's, they'd throw her a celebration dinner. "She's really making progress," they'd beam. When I started my first job at a local bookstore at 16, my father criticized me for not focusing enough on school. "Your academics should come first," he'd lecture. But when Linda spent her summers lounging by the pool with friends, my mother would defend her, "She needs her rest." Not everyone has your energy, Deborah. The pattern continued through college and into adulthood. I worked my way through Boston University with minimal help from my parents, while they paid Linda's full tuition at 3 different colleges before she dropped out completely. "College isn't for everyone," my mother said soothingly when Linda quit. I remember the sharp sting of unfairness, wondering why my educational path had been treated so differently. So, when our parents' 45th wedding anniversary was approaching, I was determined to give them something special. Mom had always dreamed of visiting Italy. She'd spend hours watching Italian cooking shows, trying to recreate the recipes in her Florida retirement community kitchen, and talking about the beautiful architecture and rich history. "Before I die, I want to see the Colosseum at sunset," she'd say at least once a month during our phone calls. I knew it would be the perfect gift, a fully paid 2-week trip to Italy, staying at a luxury hotel with a view of the Colosseum, with cooking classes in Florence, wine tastings in Tuscany, and guided tours of all the places she'd dreamed of visiting. I spent months planning every detail, working with a travel agent to create the perfect itinerary, making sure all their needs would be taken care of. I was finalizing the booking details at my desk during lunch break when my phone rang. It was Linda. "Hey sis," she chirped in that fake sweet voice she uses when she wants something. Her voice always gets higher pitched when she's plotting something. "So, what are you getting Mom and Dad for their anniversary?" "It's a big one, 45 years. I hesitated for a moment, but decided to be honest. "I've arranged a trip to Italy for them. Mom's always wanted to go." "Oh my God," Linda cut me off with a laugh that felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. "You're so predictable. I knew you'd do something boring like that. Just like you to think a simple vacation is special." My stomach tightened with that familiar feeling, part hurt, part anger, that Linda always managed to trigger. "What are you getting them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral while gripping my pen so hard it nearly snapped. "Oh, it's a secret," she said smugly, "but trust me, they're going to absolutely love it. Way more than some boring old trip." And with that, she hung up. I just shook my head and put my phone down on my desk, staring at the travel itinerary on my computer screen. Linda had always been like this, always trying to make a spectacle of everything. People who didn't know her well thought she was so interesting and unique, with her constant social media updates showcasing her seemingly perfect life. But I knew better. Behind all the grand gestures and dramatic flourishes, there wasn't much substance. Anniversary party. The day of the anniversary arrived, and I carefully packed the plane tickets and itinerary in a beautiful handcrafted Italian leather box before taking a taxi to Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant in Manhattan where the celebration was being held. My parents had flown up from their retirement community in Florida for the weekend, staying at Linda's house in the suburbs. When I got there, the place was already buzzing with relatives and family friends. I made my way through the crowd, hugging Mom and Dad, noticing how much frailer Dad looked since Christmas. His heart condition was taking its toll, and Mom's arthritis seemed worse as she winced slightly when I embraced her. "Happy anniversary," I said, kissing them both on the cheek. 45 years is quite an achievement. "Thank you, dear," Mom said, patting my arm absently before her eyes darted around the room. "Have you seen your sister? She organized all this, you know." Of course she did, I thought, but kept a smile fixed on my face. Linda flitted around the restaurant like a hyperactive butterfly, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than she could afford, pretending she was in charge of organizing everything. "The appetizers need to go on that table," she was telling a confused-looking waiter, even though Mom had already arranged everything perfectly with the restaurant manager yesterday. I rolled my eyes, but kept quiet. That was another thing about Linda, she always had to make everything about her, even our parents' anniversary. The guests started taking their seats, and the gift-giving began. I waited patiently as relatives and friends gave their presents and made speeches. Mom and Dad were beaming, tears in their eyes as they listened to everyone's kind words. Uncle Mike raised his glass and said, "To Robert and Martha, who've shown us all what true commitment looks like." Finally, I stood up, ready to present my gift and say a few words I'd carefully prepared, but before I could open my mouth, Linda jumped up, nearly knocking over her wine glass. "Everyone, please look outside," she announced dramatically, gesturing toward the windows with a theatrical sweep of her arm. The whole restaurant turned to the windows, and there it was, a brand new Lexus RX, complete with an enormous red bow on top. My stomach dropped as Linda made her grand announcement. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent restaurant, "you deserve nothing but the best for your retirement years. This is my gift to you. No more worrying about your old car breaking down." The restaurant erupted in gasps and applause. Mom and Dad burst into tears, throwing their arms around Linda. "Oh, sweetie, it's incredible." Mom sobbed. "We can't believe you did this. It's exactly what we needed." Dad, who rarely showed emotion, was openly weeping. "Linda, this is too much. We can't accept something so expensive," he said half-heartedly, even as he was already walking toward the door to get a closer look. "Nonsense," Linda proclaimed. "Nothing is too good for you two. Come outside, everyone. Let's take pictures." Everyone rushed outside to take pictures with the car. I stood in the doorway, clutching my little Italian leather gift box, feeling smaller by the second. Aunt Judy, my mother's older sister, gave me a sympathetic look as she passed. She had always seen through Linda's theatrics. After what felt like forever, people started filing back inside for dinner. I cleared my throat, feeling awkward as all eyes turned to me. I also have something for you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, as I handed over my gift. Mom and Dad opened the box, barely glancing at the tickets. "Oh, thank you, Deborah," Dad said flatly. Mom nodded, distracted, her eyes still darting to the window to look at the Lexus. "Well, my gift was obviously much more expensive and useful," Linda announced loudly, swirling her wine glass. "I mean, a car versus a vacation? No comparison. They can use the car every day, but a vacation is over so quickly." Instead of scolding her for being rude, our parents just smiled indulgently. Mom patted Linda's hand and said, "Both gifts are lovely, girls," before suggesting everyone start eating. Throughout dinner, all I could hear was Mom and Dad gushing about what an amazing, generous daughter Linda was. "She's always been so thoughtful," Mom told anyone who would listen. "Even when she was little, she'd pick flowers for me every day." I pushed my pasta primavera around my plate, feeling invisible. After an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I made up an excuse about an early meeting at work the next day and left. Nobody even noticed when I slipped out the door. As I stood on the sidewalk waiting for my Uber, I watched through the window as Linda held court at the table, everyone hanging on her every word. The ache in my chest felt physical, like someone had placed a heavy stone right on my heart. 2 weeks later, 2 weeks passed, and I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects, anything to keep my mind off how hurt I felt. The manuscript I was editing, a memoir about family reconciliation, ironically enough, provided a welcome distraction. But then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, an email popped up in my work inbox that made my blood run cold. It was from Linda, with the subject line urgent, and attached was a bill for $78,000, the cost of the Lexus RX she'd given our parents. At first, I thought it must be some kind of mistake, maybe she sent it to me by accident, but deep down I knew better. This had Linda written all over it. I'd seen this pattern before, the grand gesture followed by someone else footing the bill. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. She picked up on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "What is this about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "Oh, that?" Linda replied, sounding absolutely casual, like we were discussing the weather. "Yeah, so I got the car on a high-interest credit plan because my credit score isn't great right now, and I don't have the money to pay for it, so you need to take care of it." I nearly dropped my phone, gripping the edge of my desk to steady myself. "Are you serious right now? You bought a car you couldn't afford, made this huge show of giving it to mom and dad, and now you expect me to pay for it?" My voice rose with each word, causing my assistant to glance worriedly through the glass wall of my office. "Exactly," she chirped. "You got it. I knew you'd understand." She sounded so genuinely pleased with herself that for a moment I was speechless. "Have you lost your mind?" I finally managed, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You strutted around that restaurant like some big shot, made me look like a cheapskate in front of everyone, and now you want me to foot the bill for your gift?" "Don't be so dramatic, Deborah," Linda said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I knew so well. "It's just money. You have a good job, you're a big-shot editor, you can afford it. And you don't have a family to support like I do. Jason's college funds aren't going to save themselves, you know." "No," I said firmly, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Absolutely not. This is your mess, Linda. You clean it up." I hung up before she could respond. The calls started immediately. Every few minutes my phone would light up with Linda's name. When I didn't answer, the texts began flooding in, "You're so selfish. I can't believe you'd do this to your own sister. Please, Deborah, I'm begging you. The bank is breathing down my neck. You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? Mom and Dad will be so disappointed in you. Jason needs braces and I can't afford both." I turned my phone off and tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. My assistant knocked on my door. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I waved her away with a tight smile. By the time I left the office that evening, I had over 50 missed calls and nearly 100 text messages from Linda. But the real surprise was waiting for me at my apartment building. At the apartment, there was Linda, sitting on the steps of my building, mascara streaked down her face from crying. She jumped up as soon as she saw me. "Finally," she said, as if I'd kept her waiting on purpose. "I've been waiting here for 2 hours. How could you ignore me like this?" I tried to walk past her, but she grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Deborah, please. You have to help me. The dealership wants the first payment this Friday, and I don't have it. I don't have any of it." "Maybe you should have thought about that before buying a car you couldn't afford," I said, pulling my arm free. My doorman was watching with concern. Did you think about the payments at all when you were showing off at the restaurant? She started crying harder, big theatrical sobs that made other people entering the building stare. But for once her tears didn't move me. I'd seen this act too many times before. Instead of standing here crying, I told her, you should be figuring out how to pay for the car you bought. This isn't my problem, Linda. It's yours. But you're my sister. She wailed, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Family helps family. Yes, family helps family, I agreed, lowering my voice. But this isn't help, Linda. This is you expecting me to pay nearly $80,000 for a gift you pretended to give. That's not how it works. She screamed in frustration, a sound so startlingly infantile coming from a 43-year-old woman that I actually took a step back. Then she stormed off, leaving me finally able to enter my building. The doorman gave me a sympathetic nod as I passed. Everything okay, Ms. Mitchell? Family drama, I said with a tired smile. Nothing new. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next day as I was finishing up an editorial meeting at work, my phone rang. This time it was Mom, and her voice was stern. Deborah, we need to have a serious talk. Come to Linda's house after work. I could already guess what this was about, but I went anyway, taking the train to the suburbs after work. When I arrived, the scene was exactly as I'd expected, Mom and Dad sitting on Linda's floral print sofa, looking grave, while Linda sat between them, playing the role of the victim to perfection. Your sister told us everything, Dad began, his voice heavy with disappointment. He looked older than he had at the anniversary party, his face drawn with stress. We don't understand why you're refusing to help her. I looked at each of their faces in turn, unable to believe what I was hearing. The familiar mixture of hurt and anger rose in my chest. Are you serious? Linda buys a car she can't afford, makes this huge show of giving it to you, and now I'm the bad guy for not wanting to pay for it? Family helps family, Mom said firmly, as if she was quoting some universal truth. Linda made a mistake, but... A mistake? I interrupted, unable to contain myself any longer. A mistake is buying the wrong size shoes. This was calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing when she upstaged my gift and made me look bad in front of everyone. Don't be so dramatic, Linda sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The dealership keeps calling me. They want the first payment now, and they're threatening to report it to the credit bureaus. That tends to happen when you take out a loan, I said dryly. Did you think they were just giving away luxury SUVs for free? Mom stood up then, and what she did next knocked the wind out of me. She walked to her purse, pulled out the tickets to Italy I'd given them, and thrust them at me. We don't want gifts from someone who could be so cruel to their own sister, she said coldly. Cancel everything and give us the refund. We'll give the money to Linda for the car payments. I stared at the tickets in my hand, feeling like I'd been slapped. All those hours researching the perfect hotels, arranging special tours with local guides, scheduling cooking classes with renowned chefs, all of it dismissed without a second thought. So you're rejecting my gift, the one I spent months planning because I knew how much Mom always wanted to see Italy? Yes, Dad said firmly, crossing his arms. Until you do the right thing and help your sister. The familiar urge to argue, to defend myself, to make them understand, rose up in my throat. I wanted to scream, to make them see the pattern that had defined our family dynamics my entire life. But something stopped me. Maybe it was exhaustion from the decades of being the family scapegoat, maybe it was clarity, or maybe, for the first time in my life, I realized that nothing I said would ever change their minds. So, instead of arguing, I simply stood up, placed the tickets carefully in my bag, and looked at my family one last time. Mom and Dad sat there expectantly, probably waiting for me to break down and agree to their demands. Linda watched me with that familiar smug look, assuming she'd won again. "I'll take care of the tickets," I said quietly, my voice betraying nothing of what I was thinking, not a hint of the plan already forming in my mind. For once, I was grateful for my editor's training in keeping a poker face when negotiating with authors. "Good," Mom said firmly. "Let us know when you have the refund." As I drove back to the train station that night, my mind was already working through the details of what I would do next. They thought they knew me so well, predictable, reliable Deborah, who always did what was expected of her. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Late that night, back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table until 3 o'clock in the morning, staring at those tickets to Italy. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the stack of travel brochures I had collected. All those hours I'd spent planning the perfect trip, researching the most beautiful hotel in Rome with a view of the Colosseum, arranging private cooking classes in Florence, scheduling wine tastings in Tuscany. I'd even arranged for a local guide to take them to hidden restaurants that tourists never find, knowing Mom would love to taste authentic Italian cuisine. It was supposed to be Mom's dream come true, the trip she'd talked about for as long as I could remember. Now it would be something else entirely. When the sun came up, I hadn't slept a wink, but my mind was crystal clear. I called the travel agency the moment they opened. "Hi, I need to cancel a vacation package to Italy," I said, my voice steady. "Everything. Flights, hotel, tours, all of it." The agent was very understanding and processed everything quickly. "May I ask why you're canceling, Ms. Mitchell?" "It was such a beautiful itinerary you put together." "Change of plans," I said simply. "Family situation." Within an hour, I had confirmation that the full refund of $12,500 would be deposited into my account within 3 to 5 business days. As soon as it arrived, I moved it to a separate savings account. Not a penny would go to paying for Linda's car. I was making coffee when my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "Have you gotten the refund yet?" she demanded without preamble. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering, feeling strangely calm. "Yes, I've canceled everything." "Good. Transfer it to me right away. Linda needs to make the first payment by Friday." "No." The word hung in the air between us, simple but powerful. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What did you just say?" Mom's voice had that dangerous edge I remembered from childhood, the tone that usually preceded punishment. I said no. "I'm not giving you the money." "How dare you?" She exploded. "You selfish, greedy girl. After everything we've done for you, your sister is drowning in debt, and you're sitting there counting your money like some sort of miser." "Linda chose to buy a car she couldn't afford," I said calmly, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "That's not my problem. And frankly, it shouldn't be yours either. You're irresponsible. You're heartless. You've always been jealous of your sister. I can't believe I raised such a selfish child." Her voice had risen to a shriek. I ended the call mid-rant and blocked her number. Then I blocked Linda's number, too, for good measure. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. Like I'd finally put down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for decades. The next morning I woke up to my social media notifications exploding. Mom had posted a long message on Facebook. "With a heavy heart, I need to share something that's breaking my family apart. My oldest daughter, Deborah, has shown her true colors. When her beloved sister Linda found herself in difficult circumstances and needed help, Deborah turned her back on family. She's hoarding money while watching her sister suffer. I never thought I'd have to make something like this public, but I'm at my wit's end. My youngest daughter is facing such hardship, and her own sister refuses to help. Please pray for Linda during this difficult time, and pray that Deborah's heart softens." The comment section was a dumpster fire. Friends and distant relatives, most of whom only knew Linda through her carefully curated social media presence, were quick to pile on. "I can't believe anyone could be so cruel to their own sister. Family should always come first. I always thought Deborah seemed stuck up. What kind of person abandons family in their time of need?" I read through every single comment, my blood pressure rising with each one. The narrative Mom had crafted was masterful in its manipulation. Poor Linda, the victim of circumstance, and me, the heartless villain hoarding my wealth while she suffered. That's when something inside me snapped. Years of being the family scapegoat, of watching Linda get away with everything while I was criticized for breathing wrong, it all came to a head. I opened my laptop and started typing. Since my mother has chosen to make private family matters public, let me share the full story that she conveniently left out of her post. At my parents' 45th anniversary celebration, I gave them a fully paid luxury trip to Italy, something my mother had always dreamed of. My sister Linda showed up with a brand new Lexus RX, making a grand show of presenting it as her gift. What nobody knew was that she had bought it on credit with no means to pay for it. 2 weeks later, she demanded that I pay the $78,000 bill for the car. Yes, you read that right, she wanted me to pay for her gift. When I refused, my parents sided with her. They returned my gift and demanded I give them the refund money to pay for the car that Linda bought just to show off and upstage me at their anniversary. Don't believe me? Here are the receipts. I attached screenshots of everything: Linda's email with the $78,000 car bill, her text messages demanding I pay for it, her threats when I refused, my parents' messages demanding I give them the refund money, Mom's voicemail calling me selfish and irresponsible, the complete trail of manipulation and emotional blackmail. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The tide of public opinion turned so fast it gave me whiplash. Oh my God, she bought a car she couldn't afford just to show up her sister. What kind of person demands their sister pay for their gift to someone else? Those poor parents. My foot, they're enabling this spoiled brat. Deborah, honey, I am so sorry. We jumped to conclusions. Your sister needs professional help. I can't believe your parents returned your thoughtful gift to enable your sister's irresponsible behavior. Within 20 minutes, my Aunt Judy, Mom's older sister, commented, "Martha, I love you, but this is shameful behavior. You've always let Linda get away with murder while holding Deborah to impossible standards." I bit my tongue for years, but not anymore. The comments kept flowing in, each one more supportive than the last. People began sharing stories of their own experiences with entitled siblings and enabling parents. My post had touched a nerve among middle-aged women who had dealt with similar family dynamics all their lives. 15 minutes later, Mom's original post disappeared. She sent me a text from a different number: "How dare you air our dirty laundry in public?" I couldn't help but laugh at the irony as I blocked that number, too. The hypocrisy was staggering. It was fine when she publicly shamed me, but not when I defended myself with the truth. In the weeks that followed the social media showdown, the family split into two distinct camps. My cousin Sophia called to tell me that a massive argument had broken out in our extended family group chat, with most relatives firmly on my side. She kept me updated on all the drama I was missing by blocking everyone. "Aunt Judy really let your mom have it," Sophia told me over the phone. She said she's been watching this pattern for 40 years and couldn't stay silent anymore. But the most interesting news came from my Uncle Mike, who still talked to both sides of the family. He told me that my parents had been forced to dip into their retirement savings to make the payments on Linda's car. They'd apparently tried to return it to the dealership, but the contract Linda signed had no return clause. "Your dad had to pull $30,000 from his 401k, Uncle Mike said during one of our weekly phone calls. "They're trying to keep it quiet, but they had to pay the penalties for early withdrawal and everything. Your mom's furious about it, but here's the kicker: they're still blaming you." Of course they are, I said, feeling oddly detached from it all. The hurt was still there, but it felt more distant now, like an old scar rather than a fresh wound. How's Linda handling it? Oh, she's playing the victim card for all it's worth. Keeps telling everyone how traumatized she is by your betrayal and how she never thought her own sister would destroy the family like this. But nobody's buying it anymore. Your post opened a lot of people's eyes. The fallout wasn't limited to just our family. Linda's carefully cultivated image as the fun, spontaneous sister who lived life to the fullest had taken a serious hit. Several of her friends reached out to me privately to share similar stories of her grand gestures that always seemed to end with someone else footing the bill. She threw this huge surprise birthday party for me last year, her college roommate Sarah confided. Rented a whole restaurant, ordered expensive champagne, had a live band, everything. Then, 2 weeks later, she started hinting that since it was my party, I should help pay for it. I ended up covering most of the cost because she guilted me into it. I thought I was the only one she did this to. My parents, meanwhile, were getting a taste of their own medicine. Their friends in the retirement community who had watched them favor Linda and criticize me for years were finally speaking up. Mom's friend since high school, Janet, apparently confronted her at their weekly bridge game. Your mother tried to defend herself, Uncle Mike reported. Said they only helped Linda more because she needed it, while you were always so independent. Janet asked her if it ever occurred to them that maybe you had to be independent because they were too busy bailing Linda out to help you. I listened to all these updates with a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Part of me was glad the truth was finally out, but another part mourned the family relationships that would never be the same, not that they had been particularly healthy to begin with. The most surprising development came from Sophia, who was starting college in the fall. She called me one evening sounding nervous. I wanted to thank you, she said, for standing up to them. I mean, I've been watching how Aunt Martha and Uncle Robert treat you and Linda my whole life, and well, I always felt pressure to be more like Linda, flashy and exciting. But seeing you stand your ground made me realize it's okay to be responsible and set boundaries. Mom says you're her new hero. Planning a new journey, as the family drama played out, I threw myself into planning my own trip. I decided to use the Italy refund to treat myself to something I'd always wanted to do, explore Mexico. Every evening after work I researched different destinations and experiences, building an itinerary that was purely for me, not to please anyone else or prove anything to anyone. I decided on a mix of cultural exploration and adventure, starting in Mexico City with its amazing museums and historical sites, then to Oaxaca for its incredible food scene, followed by some time in Tulum for its beaches and cenotes, and finally to Chichen Itza to explore the Mayan ruins. I booked cooking classes, photography tours, and even a few scuba diving lessons, everything I'd always wanted to do but had put off while trying to be the responsible one. The day before my departure, I received a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a card signed by over 20 relatives, including Grandma Rose, all wishing me an amazing trip. They'd also included old family photos I'd never seen before, pictures of me as a child, times when I'd achieved something or helped someone, moments my parents had overlooked in their focus on Linda. Aunt Judy had written a note, "We should have spoken up sooner, but we're so proud of you now." I packed those photos in my suitcase along with my new camera and hiking boots. As I was doing my final check of my apartment before heading to the airport, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. It was my mother. Deborah? Her voice sounded older somehow, less certain. Yes, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I'm leaving for Mexico tomorrow. There was a long pause. Your father and I have been talking, she continued. All this with Linda and the car, it's opened our eyes to some things. We're making her go to financial counseling and, well, I know it's too late, but I'm sorry about Italy. You put so much thought into that gift, and we just threw it back in your face. Yes, I said simply. You did. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Another long pause. Have a good trip, Deborah. Be safe. And maybe when you get back, we could have coffee? Just us? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe, I said. I'll let you know when I'm back. After we hung up, I sat on my packed suitcase and let out a long breath. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a possibility of change. Whether anything would come of it remained to be seen. Epilogue. The next morning, as my plane took off toward Mexico City, I thought about how differently everything had turned out from what I'd planned. I'd wanted to give my parents their dream trip to Italy and instead ended up taking my own dream trip to Mexico. I'd tried to keep the peace in the family and ended up causing the biggest upheaval in our family's history. I'd spent my whole life being the reliable, predictable one, and had finally done something completely unexpected. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Have an amazing time. Can't wait to hear all about it. By the way, Linda's car got repossessed yesterday. Karma's real. I smiled and turned off my phone. Linda's drama, my parents' issues, the family complications, all of it could wait for the next 2 weeks. I had ancient ruins to explore, beaches to walk, food to taste, and photographs to take. For the first time in my life, at 45 years old, I was putting myself first, and it felt absolutely right. I never thought I'd be standing here again, at 55 years old, staring at my parents' weathered front door. After 2 decades of distance, my name's Carol, and this house holds memories I've tried desperately to forget. The weight of my smartphone feels unusually heavy in my hand, still warm from my mother Martha's unexpected call asking me to come over urgently. Behind me, my sensible sedan sits in the driveway, and I can't help but think about my 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, who I just dropped off at my friend Maria's place. It'll only take a couple of hours, I had told Sarah, trying to sound more confident than I felt, though the slight tremor in my voice probably gave me away. The last time I properly spoke to my parents was at my grandmother's funeral 5 years ago. Before that, it was that terrible day when I was 35, when they chose my sister, Diane, over me. I still remember standing in this very spot, tears streaming down my face, as they told me they were giving my college fund to Diane for her wedding. But it's my education. I had screamed, my voice breaking. Your sister needs a proper wedding, Mom had said firmly, her lips pressed into that familiar thin line of disapproval. You can take out student loans like everyone else. I left that day and never really came back. My grandmother was the only one who stood by me. She helped me pay for community college, not the prestigious university I had dreamed of, but it was something. I worked hard, got my degree, and built my own life, brick by painful brick. The 20 years that followed were a blur of determination and small victories. I met Robert, my ex-husband, during my final year of college. We got married, had Sarah, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Even after our divorce 10 years ago, things stayed civilized. Robert pays good alimony, and we both put Sarah first. Now, at 55, I'm doing okay. The accounting firm where I've worked for the past 20 years has been hinting at a promotion. Between that, the alimony, and my part-time consulting work, I can afford to spend plenty of time with Sarah and still save for her medical school dreams. Taking a deep breath, I finally ring the doorbell, the same chime I remember from my childhood. Whatever they want, I tell myself, I'm not that terrified 35-year-old anymore. I'm a woman who's built her own life, who's raised a remarkable daughter, who doesn't need their approval anymore. At least that's what I keep telling myself. Carol, you came. Martha opens the door, and her enthusiasm catches me off guard. She looks much older than I remember, her once vibrant auburn hair now completely gray, deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth. Dad stands behind her, attempting a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, his shoulders slightly stooped with age. At 78, John looks far more fragile than the strong fire chief I remember from my childhood. Where's Sarah? Mom asks, peering around me with hopeful eyes. I would love to see my granddaughter. She's at a friend's, I cut her off, stepping inside and immediately feeling the weight of 20 years pressing down on me. You said it was urgent, Martha. The house smells the same, Mom's vanilla air freshener mixing with Dad's coffee. They lead me to the living room, and I notice how everything looks worn down, faded. The fancy furniture they bought for Diane's wedding is showing its age, the upholstery threadbare in spots, the coffee table scratched and dull. Would you like some tea? Mom asks, wringing her hands nervously, her wedding ring loose on her thinner finger. Just tell me why you called, I say, remaining standing, my handbag clutched tightly against my side like armor. It's been years, and suddenly it's urgent. Mom starts crying, not the quiet tears I remember from my childhood, but deep, body-shaking sobs that make her seem suddenly older and more vulnerable. Dad puts his arm around her, his hand trembling slightly, and I feel my stomach tighten with a mix of concern and wariness. We're going to lose the house, he finally says, his voice raspy with age and emotion. I wait, knowing there's more. There's always more with them. Your sister, Mom begins, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and I feel that familiar twist in my gut. Of course, it's about Diane. It's always been about Diane. She asked us to take out a business loan for her husband, for Greg's IT startup. We used the house as collateral. Dad explains, looking everywhere but at me, his fingers nervously tapping against his knee. The business went under 6 months ago. Let me guess, I say, my voice flat as I cross my arms. Diane is not paying. Greg's business went bankrupt. Dad nods slowly, the motion seeming painful. Diane and the kids are struggling. They've stopped making payments, and we can't cover it ourselves with our retirement income. The medical bills from my back surgery last year took most of our savings. I start laughing, the sound harsh even to my own ears, and they both look at me like I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. After 20 years, nothing has changed. So you called me, the daughter you abandoned, the one whose education fund you gave away, to bail you out of another mess Diane created? The words taste bitter on my tongue. We know you're doing well, Mom says quickly, wiping her eyes. Your job at the accounting firm, the consulting work, we wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. I stand there, looking at these people who chose my sister over me at every turn, who didn't attend my small wedding, who barely acknowledged me at my grandmother's funeral because Diane was dealing with her first divorce. I'll think about it, I hear myself say, and I'm as surprised as they are by my words. I need to pick up Sarah. Leaving parents' house, as I drive away, the late afternoon sun glinting off my rearview mirror, I can't shake the feeling that I'm about to make either the biggest mistake or the most important decision of my life. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. My knuckles turn white as I grip the steering wheel, the conversation with my parents playing on repeat in my mind. Mom, why are you crying? Sarah asked as soon as I picked her up from Maria's house. My daughter has always been perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. With her dark, intelligent eyes and analytical mind, she reminds me of my younger self before my dreams were derailed. I quickly wiped my eyes, not even realizing I'd been crying during the drive. Just thinking about some difficult decisions, sweetie, I said, trying to sound casual. Actually, I saw your grandparents today. Sarah's eyes lit up instantly. At 16, she's starting to wonder about her roots, her family history beyond just Robert and me. Really? The ones from the old photos? Can I meet them? I'm gathering family medical history for my pre-med research project. Of course she'd want to meet them. They were her grandparents, even if they'd never bothered to be part of her life. And of course she'd immediately think of her medical school ambitions, the dream I'd never gotten to pursue. A week later, I spent the next week wrestling with my thoughts, barely sleeping, playing out every possible scenario in my head. The promotion at work was within reach. Peyton had all but confirmed it yesterday, but it would mean more travel, more responsibility. And now this situation with my parents' house. "You're insane," Maria told me over coffee in her kitchen, the morning light highlighting the concern in her eyes. "After everything they did? After how they always chose Diane?" "Maybe I am," I admitted, running my finger around the rim of my coffee mug. "But Sarah deserves a chance to know her grandparents before it's too late. And honestly, maybe I need this too, to finally face it all. They're in their 70s now. How many years do they have left?" So, a week later, I found myself driving back to my parents' house, this time with Sarah bouncing excitedly in the passenger seat, her biology textbook forgotten in her lap. She'd spent the morning asking questions about her grandparents, what they were like, what they did before retirement, whether her grandfather's chess skills were really as good as I'd reluctantly mentioned. The reunion was strange. Mom burst into tears again, her hands trembling as she reached for Sarah, and Dad just stood there awkwardly, leaning slightly on his cane before Sarah broke the ice by stepping forward and hugging them both. They looked shocked, then delighted, and for a moment, I saw genuine joy in their eyes, the kind I used to see directed at Diane. We spent the afternoon there, and I watched as Sarah charmed them completely with her intelligence and warmth. She showed them her academic awards, told them about her advanced placement classes, about her volunteer work at the local hospital, about her dreams of becoming a surgeon. They listened to every word, and I saw something I hadn't expected, regret in their eyes when they looked at me, seeing the reflection of what could have been. The decision, that evening, as Sarah chattered happily about her grandparents on the drive home, I made my decision. Maybe I was crazy, maybe I was setting myself up for more hurt, but I was going to help them. There was something about seeing Sarah connect with them that made me realize time was running out for any kind of resolution. The next day, I called my real estate agent and arranged to rent out my apartment again. Then I called Mom. My heart pounded as I heard the phone ring, old insecurities threatening to resurface. "I'll help with the loan payments," I said before I could change my mind, my voice firm despite my internal conflict. "Sarah and I are moving in. My rental income will go toward the loan payments. I'll help with bills too, but we need to set some boundaries, Martha." There was silence on the other end, then Mom started crying again. "Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much," she sobbed. I could hear Dad in the background asking what was happening. "You don't know what this means to us." But I did know. It meant they wouldn't lose their home of 40 years. It meant they wouldn't have to face Diane's failure. It meant they were still choosing the path of least resistance. Within 2 weeks, Sarah and I had moved in. I bought new appliances for the house, a refrigerator with an ice maker that Sarah loved, a dishwasher that actually worked, and a washing machine that didn't sound like it was about to explode. I also installed handrails in the bathroom for Dad, whose back problems had worsened with age. His posture improved once he didn't have to bend over to hand-wash dishes anymore, and Mom seemed genuinely happy to have us there. Life fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine over the next few months. Mom started making breakfast for everyone, and despite my initial reservations, I had to admit it was nice coming downstairs to fresh coffee and pancakes after decades of eating breakfast alone or just with Sarah. She picked Sarah up from school when I worked late, helped her with homework, and even started teaching her to bake, something I'd never had the patience for. Dad switched to part-time consulting work at the fire department, his constant back aches finally getting better with less physical strain. He taught Sarah how to play chess, something I'd never learned, and their weekly matches became a tradition that filled the house with laughter I hadn't heard in years. I found myself working more hours at the accounting firm, knowing Sarah was well taken care of. Peyton Thompson, my boss, called me into his office one afternoon as the spring sun streamed through the windows. We've been noticing your increased dedication lately, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. The Milwaukee client specifically requested you for their audit. How would you feel about a senior manager position? It would mean heading our nonprofit division. The new position meant more money, but also more responsibility, including regular business trips to other states for client meetings and audits. In the past, I would have turned it down immediately. Single mom, no support system, it wouldn't have worked. I'll take it, I said, surprising myself with how confident I felt. After 20 years of putting my career second, it felt like my time had finally come. The first time I had to leave for a business trip, I was a nervous wreck. 3 days in Chicago felt like an eternity. She'll be fine, I said to myself, probably 100 times as I packed my suitcase. Mom and Dad will take care of her. And they did. Mom sent me pictures of Sarah doing homework, having dinner, playing chess with Dad. It worked. It all worked, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I could breathe, like I could finally pursue my own ambitions without sacrificing Sarah's well-being. Growing tensions, but there were moments, little things that made me uneasy, like when Mom would get phone calls from Diane and disappear into her room, emerging with red-rimmed eyes, or when I'd find bank transfer notifications on Mom's phone while setting up her new tablet, money going to Diane's account despite their financial struggles. She needs help sometimes, Mom defended when I confronted her about it one evening after Sarah had gone to bed. We stood in the kitchen, the dishwasher humming between us like a barrier. She's going through a rough patch with Greg. You know how difficult second marriages can be. Mom, I'm paying all your bills and the loan that Diane defaulted on, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the familiar anger rising within me. I'm helping you manage Dad's medications and doctor appointments. How is it fair that you're sending her money that you don't even have? You don't understand, Mom snapped, suddenly defensive, her shoulders tense beneath her cardigan. Diane is not to blame for Greg's business failing. She has 2 teenagers to feed. College-aged kids are expensive. And I have 1 teen and all your bills to feed, I shot back, the familiar feeling of being second best burning in my chest. Sarah's medical school will cost a fortune, and I'm saving every penny while supporting this household. But Mom had already turned away, shutting down the conversation like she always did when it came to Diane. These arguments became more frequent as the months passed, but I tried to ignore them. Sarah was happy. I was advancing in my career with quarterly trips to the Chicago and Milwaukee offices, and most days it felt like we were healing old wounds. Dad even apologized one night, after a few glasses of wine, for what happened with my college fund 20 years ago. We made mistakes, he said, staring into his glass, his hands shaking slightly with the early signs of what I suspected might be Parkinson's disease. Big ones. I've regretted it ever since he left. His eyes, clouded with cataracts that needed surgery we couldn't yet afford, met mine briefly. Watching Sarah, seeing how bright she is, it makes me wonder what you could have become if we'd supported you the same way. I wanted to say more, to finally have that conversation we'd been avoiding for 2 decades, but Mom quickly changed the subject to Sarah's upcoming science fair project. The moment was lost, like so many others in this house. 3 years passed this way. Sarah turned 19, looking more grown-up every day as she prepared for college applications. Her dream of medical school was within reach with her perfect GPA and volunteer hours at the hospital. I got used to my new role at work, traveling every few weeks, but always coming home to a happy daughter who was thriving with the stability and support we'd created. The loan payments were steady, the bills were paid, and life was, if not perfect, at least stable. Then came that Tuesday evening. I remember it was Tuesday because I'd just closed a big account in Phoenix and caught an early flight home, wanting to surprise Sarah with the news that I'd secured an interview for her with a prominent surgeon at the university hospital. I could hear voices from the driveway, too many voices for our usually quiet household. Opening the front door, I stepped into chaos. There, sprawled on my parents' couch, the one I'd just had reupholstered last month with my bonus money, was Diane. Her blonde hair was expensively highlighted but poorly styled, her face showing the signs of her 58 years despite what looked like recent cosmetic work. Beside her were two teenagers I recognized from photos but had never met, my niece and nephew. Suitcases were scattered around the living room, and Diane was tapping away on her phone, a glass of wine dangling carelessly from her other hand, barely looking up as I entered. "Oh," she said, her tone making it clear I was interrupting something, her eyes narrowing as they took in my business suit and briefcase. "Look who's here. The prodigal daughter returns." And just like that, I knew everything was about to change again. Only this time, I wasn't that naive 35-year-old, and I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Confrontation, I left Greg, Diane announced lazily from the couch, swirling her wine glass as if she was commenting on the weather. The red liquid sloshed dangerously close to the edge. "He's a complete loser. Lost everything in that stupid crypto scheme. We'll be staying here now." She took another sip, her lipstick leaving a scarlet smudge on the glass. I stood there, my work bag still in hand, trying to process what I was hearing. My parents sat in their usual chairs, looking everywhere but at me. Martha's hands twisted nervously in her lap while John stared out the window. The kids, my niece Amber, 17, and nephew Michael, 15, were sprawled on the floor watching something on their tablets, headphones blocking out the adult conversation. "We'll be staying here?" I repeated slowly, setting my briefcase down with deliberate care. "In the house where I pay all the bills and the loan that you defaulted on?" Diane's face flushed red, the color creeping up her neck. "Oh, here we go. Miss Perfect with her fancy job and her promotion and her perfect daughter. Some of us have actual problems, Carol, actual problems that don't involve color-coding our financial spreadsheets." I could feel my blood pressure rising, the familiar tension headache beginning to form behind my eyes. Like taking out a huge loan in our parents' name and then not paying it? That kind of problem? Or abandoning your children's college funds for yet another get-rich-quick scheme? That problem? "Girls, please," Mom interrupted, finally finding her voice. She looked smaller somehow, caught between her two daughters. "We're family. We need to stick together in times like these." I let out a harsh laugh that surprised even me. Funny how family becomes important when you need something. Where was this family spirit when you gave away my college fund, or when you didn't even attend my graduation because Diane had a spa weekend planned? "That was years ago," Mom snapped, her voice sharpening. "Why can't you let it go? Your sister needs us now." I looked at Dad, hoping for some support, but he just sat there, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on his worn slippers. The fire chief, who once commanded a station of 50 men, couldn't even look his younger daughter in the eye. Tensions escalate, the next few weeks were tense. Diane sprawled on the couch all day, texting and watching TV, wine glass never far from her hand. Her kids ran wild through the house, making messes they never cleaned up, leaving dishes in the sink, towels on the bathroom floor. But what really got to me was how my parents changed. Suddenly, Sarah was invisible to them. When she tried to show Grandma her acceptance letter to the state university with a pre-med scholarship, Mom just waved her away, too busy helping Michael with his video game. When Sarah asked Dad for their weekly chess match, he said he was too tired, right before spending 2 hours playing catch with Amber in the backyard. "Mom," I confronted her one evening after Sarah went to bed. I found her in the kitchen, making a late-night snack for Diane, who was watching reality TV in the living room. "What's going on? Why are you treating Sarah differently?" "Don't be ridiculous," Mom dismissed me with a wave of her hand, not meeting my eyes as she arranged crackers on a plate. "Sarah's older, she doesn't need as much attention. Amber and Michael are younger, they need more support right now. They're going through a difficult transition." Support? Sarah's 19, applying for colleges, planning her future. She needs her grandparents too. I leaned against the counter, trying to make her look at me. She's spent 3 years building a relationship with you both, and now you're acting like she doesn't exist. You're overreacting, as usual, Mom said with a sigh. Sarah's fine. She has you. But Mom had already turned away, hurrying to answer Diane's call for more wine. 2 months crawled by. I threw myself into work, taking extra projects just to avoid being home. The promotion I'd worked so hard for was now a refuge rather than an achievement. Sarah spent more time at the hospital volunteering, extending her hours to avoid coming home to a house where she was suddenly an afterthought. Diane still hadn't looked for a job, claiming she was recovering from emotional trauma, and my parents seemed fine with it. Every time I brought it up, they defended her. She's going through a difficult time, Dad would say, his voice tired. She has the children to think about, Mom would add, as if Sarah wasn't also a child, their grandchild. Meanwhile, I was still paying for everything, the loan, the bills, the groceries that seemed to disappear twice as fast now. But money wasn't what bothered me most. It was watching Sarah become a ghost in her own home. The breaking point then came that Wednesday. I had come home early, hoping to take Sarah for dinner at her favorite Italian restaurant, our little escape when things got too tense at home. I heard the shouting before I even opened the front door. You lazy, good-for-nothing brat. Diane's voice echoed through the house, slurred with afternoon wine. Look at this mess. Clean it up right now. I rushed inside to find Diane standing over Sarah, who was on her knees picking up scattered papers and books, her medical school application essays and recommendation letters lying crumpled on the floor. My daughter's face was flushed with humiliation, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What's going on here? I demanded, dropping my purse on the entryway table with a thud. Your precious pre-med princess refuses to help around the house, Diane spat, gesturing wildly at the mess. A half-empty wine glass dangled precariously from her other hand. She thinks she's too good to clean up after her cousins. Just like her mother, always thinking she's better than everyone else. After her cousins? I looked at the scattered papers again, recognizing Sarah's careful handwriting on some of the pages that had clearly been stepped on. You mean your kids destroyed Sarah's college application materials? Where are they, by the way? They're at the mall with Mom, Diane said dismissively, taking another sip of wine. Someone has to keep those kids entertained, and since you're never here. She waved her hand toward me, wine sloshing over the rim. I'm never here because I'm working, I exploded, moving to help Sarah gather her papers, my hands shaking with rage. Unlike some people who lie around all day drinking wine and expecting everyone else to support them and their children. The argument that followed was ugly. Diane ran to our parents when they returned, crying about how I was bullying her, how I'd always been jealous of her, how difficult her life was now. And they took her side. Of course they took her side, just like they had 20 years ago, just like they always would. Carol, you need to be more understanding, Mom pleaded, her hand resting on Diane's shoulder in that familiar protective gesture I'd seen my entire life. Diane's children. What about my child? I interrupted, gesturing to Sarah who stood silently by the stairs, clutching her damaged application papers. What about Sarah? She works hard, she volunteers at the hospital, she's applying to medical schools, and you let Diane treat her like this? But they didn't answer. They never did when it came to choosing between Diane and me. I thought that was bad, but I had no idea what was coming. The crisis, the following week, I had to fly to Seattle for an emergency meeting with a major client. It was only supposed to be for 5 days. 5 days that would change everything. You'll be okay? I asked Sarah for the 100th time at breakfast, my stomach twisting with anxiety about leaving her alone with Diane and the others. You have your key to Maria's house if you need to get away. I'll be fine, Mom, she assured me, trying to smile but not quite meeting my eyes. I've got my phone. We can video chat every night. And I'll be at the hospital most of the time anyway. 4 days into my trip, around 9 p.m. Seattle time, my phone rang. Sarah's picture flashed on the screen. The moment I answered, I knew something was terribly wrong. Mom, her voice was small, broken by sobs that tore at my heart. Mom, I'm at Maria's. Aunt Diane, she went through my things. She found my acceptance letter and scholarship offer. She tore up my medical school application files. She said I was wasting my time, that the family couldn't afford to help me, that I was selfish for not getting a job to help with bills instead. The world stopped spinning. My 19-year-old daughter's future was being systematically destroyed by my sister, just as mine had been 20 years ago. History was repeating itself in the cruelest way possible. Then Grandma took her side, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. She said maybe Diane was right, that medical school was too expensive and too much of a burden on the family. Mom, all my recommendation letters, my personal statements, they're ruined. The application deadline is next week. With shaking hands, I called Diane. She answered on the 5th ring, sounding annoyed. Oh, did the princess call you? She's being dramatic. Maybe now she'll learn not to be so obstinate, always arguing, always thinking she's better than everyone else with her fancy medical school dreams. The family needs her income now, not more expenses. I hung up and called my parents. Mom answered. Your granddaughter's medical school applications have been destroyed, I said, my voice cold and steady despite the rage burning inside me. Did you know that? Did you watch while Diane tore up her future, just like you watched when you gave away my college fund 20 years ago? There was a pause, then Mom's voice hardened. Maybe it's better this way, Carol. The family needs to focus on Diane right now. She and the kids need our support. Sarah can apply next year, or find a more practical career. Maybe you and Sarah should find somewhere else to live. You don't really fit here anymore. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Some things never change. Some people never change. 20 years had passed, and nothing was different. I was still the afterthought, and now my daughter was too. You're right, Mom, I said quietly. We don't fit there. We never did. I hung up and booked the first flight home. It was time to end this cycle once and for all. The return, the flight home, was the longest 5 hours of my life. Maria sent me updates about Sarah every half hour, but I couldn't rest until I could hold my daughter in my arms. When I finally got to Maria's house at 3 a.m., Sarah was asleep on the couch, dried tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. The sight of her, curled up like she used to do as a child, made my heart ache. She told me what happened, Maria whispered as I stroked Sarah's hair, her dark strands slipping through my fingers. The kitchen light cast long shadows across the living room. Carol, it's worse than you think. According to Sarah, Diane had been going through her things for weeks, making comments about how her medical school ambitions were selfish and unrealistic. Maria leaned closer, her voice dropping lower. Diane told Sarah that you were wasting family money on her education when it should be going to help her cousins. She said terrible things about you too, that you were showing off with your promotion, that you thought you were better than everyone else. I closed my eyes, the familiar pain washing over me. What about my parents? What did they do? Nothing, Maria said simply. They watched it happen. When Sarah tried to stand up for herself, your mother told her she needed to learn her place in the family hierarchy. Those were her exact words. I let Sarah sleep and spent the night making calls, first to my rental agency, explaining the situation and asking them to help me end the current tenant's lease early, then to my lawyer, asking about my rights regarding the appliances and furniture I bought for my parents' house, finally to a moving company. By dawn, I had a plan. The next morning, I took Sarah to breakfast at her favorite diner. The place was nearly empty at 7 a.m., giving us the privacy we needed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was a determined set to her jaw that reminded me of myself. "Sarah, I need you to be honest with me," I said, watching her pick at her pancakes. "Has this happened before? Has Diane hurt you before?" Sarah's silence told me everything. She pushed her food around the plate, not meeting my eyes. She said I was just like you, pretentious and selfish," she finally whispered. "That I thought I was better than her kids with my hospital volunteering and academic awards. Grandma said the same thing, that I needed to learn my place, that family meant supporting Diane right now." My hand shook as I gripped my coffee cup. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you seemed happy," Sarah said, looking up at me with those wise eyes that sometimes made me forget she was only 19. "Your promotion, your trips, you were finally doing things for yourself after all those years of just focusing on me. And Grandma and Grandpa, sometimes they were nice when Aunt Diane wasn't around. I thought I could handle it." I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm diner. "Listen to me, Sarah. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to me than you and your future. Not my parents, not their house, not any of it. We're going home to our apartment, and this time we're staying there. And we're going to get your medical school applications resubmitted if I have to call every administrator and professor personally." The confrontation, after breakfast, we drove to my parents' house. Diane's car was gone, probably on one of her mysterious errands that never seemed to involve job hunting. Mom opened the door, surprise flickering across her face when she saw me. She looked older than she had just 5 days ago, the lines around her mouth deeper. "Carol, we didn't expect you back so soon." Her eyes darted to Sarah, then quickly away, guilt written in the slump of her shoulders. I walked past her without a word, Sarah's hand firmly in mine. The moving crew I'd hired was already waiting outside, their truck parked on the street. "Take everything I bought," I instructed them, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I pointed at the refrigerator, washing machine, dishwasher, the new couch, the TV, the medical reference books I'd bought for Sarah. "Everything with my name on the receipt goes." I went through the house methodically, pointing at every item I'd purchased over the past 3 years. The new mattress in my parents' room that helped with Dad's back. The TV lift cabinet in the living room. The patio furniture where we'd had so many family dinners. "You can't do this." Mom's voice rose in panic as she followed me from room to room. "We need those things." "Your father's back, actually, I can," I replied calmly, handing the movers my proof of purchase for each item. "I bought them, they're mine. I've arranged for a home health aide to come 3 times a week to help Dad. The service starts tomorrow." Dad came home while the movers were working. He stood in the doorway, watching as they dismantled the entertainment system I bought last Christmas. He looked smaller somehow, his fire chief confidence completely gone. "Carol," he started, leaning heavily on his cane, but I cut him off. "Just don't. You watched Diane destroy Sarah's future. You chose Diane over me again, and this time you chose her over Sarah too. We're done." "But the loan," Mom's voice quivered, her hands twisting her wedding ring. "The bills." I turned to face them both. They stood together near the staircase, suddenly looking every one of their 70-plus years. "You'll have to figure that out yourselves, just like I had to figure out college on my own, just like Sarah had to figure out how to protect herself in what should have been her safe home. Consider this my final payment for all the times you chose Diane over me." New beginnings, the next few months were challenging but liberating. My parents and Diane didn't go down without a fight. The calls started the very next day, first from Mom, then Dad, then Diane, then back to Mom. They left voicemails ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas. The text messages were worse: screenshots of their overdue bills, photos of Diane's kids looking sad, guilt trip attempts about how they might lose the house. Mom even sent pictures of my old bedroom, as if that would somehow change my mind. "We can work this out," one message read. "Family sticks together. Why don't you answer them?" Sarah asked one evening as my phone buzzed with another message. We were sitting on our apartment's balcony, sharing a pizza and watching the sunset. Our apartment felt different now, smaller than my parents' house, but somehow more spacious, without the weight of their expectations and disappointing history. "Because we don't owe them anything," I replied, silencing the phone. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I miss Grandpa's chess games sometimes," she admitted, taking a bite of pizza. "But not how they made me feel when Aunt Diane came." I pulled her close, feeling her warmth against my side. "We can get you chess lessons if you want. You can learn from someone who won't stop playing with you just because your cousin shows up." Weeks turned into months. Through extended family, I heard updates about my parents' situation. They had gone back to working part-time, Dad doing consulting for the fire department despite his health issues, Mom taking on some substitute teaching. They were struggling to pay their bills. The bank was threatening foreclosure because they couldn't make the loan payments. Diane still wasn't working, still complaining about me to anyone who would listen. I heard she'd started dating a divorce doctor, her next potential financial savior. I used the money I'd been spending on my parents' bills to help Sarah reapply to medical schools instead. We took weekend trips to tour university hospitals. Without the constant drama of my parents' house, I could focus more on my work while actually spending quality time with my daughter. Sarah's grades improved even further. Without Diane's kids interrupting her study time, she aced her MCAT and received acceptance letters from 3 medical schools, including one with a substantial scholarship. Sometimes I caught her looking at old photos from our time at my parents' house, but she never asked to go back. One Sunday morning, almost a year after we'd left, I was making breakfast when Sarah came into the kitchen looking thoughtful. She'd just returned from an overnight hospital volunteering shift, her scrubs exchanged for comfortable weekend clothes. "Mom, are you happy now?" she asked, leaning against the counter. I stopped whisking the eggs and really thought about it. Was I happy? Happy that I'd walked away from a toxic situation, happy that I'd protected my daughter, happy that I'd finally broken free from the pattern of always being second best? "Yes," I said finally, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. "I am." "Are you?" Sarah smiled, that bright, unworried smile I hadn't seen in years, the one that reminded me of when she was a little girl, before she understood the complexities of family dysfunction. "Yeah. I like it being just us. And next year, medical school." She reached for a piece of toast. "Thank you for choosing me, Mom. For making my future a priority." Later that day, I deleted all my parents' and Diane's numbers from my phone. I kept their voicemails though, stored in a folder labeled "Never Again," a reminder of why we left, in case I ever started to doubt myself. I heard through Maria that the bank finally foreclosed on my parents' house. They moved into a small apartment, and Diane found someone else to mooch off of, her new doctor boyfriend apparently. Sometimes I wonder if they ever really understood what they did wrong, or if they're still telling themselves that I'm the selfish one. But honestly, I don't care anymore. Sarah and I might be a small family, but we're a real one. We support each other's dreams, celebrate each other's victories, and never make each other feel less than. We travel when we want, laugh when we want, and never have to apologize for taking up space in our own home. The money I used to spend on my parents' bills now goes into Sarah's medical school fund, and this time nobody's going to give it away for someone else's benefit. At 55, I've finally learned that family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about choice. And I choose Sarah, I choose myself, I choose breaking the cycle of putting Diane first. And in that choice, I've found the peace I've been searching for since I was 35 years old, standing on my parents' doorstep with my dreams in pieces around me.